I just spent 4 weeks traveling, and this is the video where I tell you about all of the books that I read during that time. I read 7.5 books while I was traveling, and I loved every single one of them. I'm being so serious. There were no misses. No misses. Like, every single one of these books I'm low-key obsessed with for different reasons. I picked such good books for my travel reads. And also, I did not spend more than like $5 on any of these 7-8 books that I've read. I either borrowed them through Overdrive/Libby from my local library, so free, or they were on sale for like $2.99, or they were included in Kobo Plus, which, again, full transparency, I was given a free subscription to with this. But so far, so good. So perks upon perks, and more perks to come when I dive in. But let me tell you about these bangers of books that I read while I was away. The very first book that I read, which I started and finished on the plane on the way over to London, was The Bombshell by Darrow. Farr. Now, if you've watched my June new release bulletin, you will have heard of this book. I talk about it there. The physical actual book came out in Australia on June 24th, but I started reading it on June 10th. A little ebook perk, here we are already, that I didn't know about. So thank you, Kobo. Thank you to my local library who added it to their catalog so that I could borrow it and read it. Now, this book is heavily inspired by the real-life kidnapping of Patty Hearst and her memoir in which she talks about that experience. The Bombshell is set in 1993, and it follows this beautiful and precocious 17-year-old called Severine, who is the daughter of a politician in Corsica. Severine is then kidnapped by a group of rebel nationalists, and when their negotiations don't really go to plan, they have to hold on to Severine, and the group end up spending a lot of time together, getting to know each other, chatting about their respective ideals. Now, I didn't actually know a thing about Corsica before I started reading this book. I could not have pointed to it on a map or told you whether it was a, country or a city, and maybe that's complete ignorance on my part, but if anybody else is in the same boat, Corsica is basically this island that is in between France and Italy in the Mediterranean. It's basically right above Sardinia, but it's part of France, technically. However, culturally, it feels very Italian and does have a lot of Italian sort of cultural history. Now, the most sort of powerful standout part of this novel for me is the fact that Severine is really at this sort of ripe, perfect point in her teenagehood where she has discovered the power that her sexuality holds, right? She knows she's beautiful. She knows that her sexuality can, give her this sway and this power over men. And so she's sort of quite loudly self-confident in that, and her ability to basically wrap any man around her finger. But there's also this very finite balance between sort of quite adult thinking, but also teenager maturity that exists within Severine. She does feel very real, like this feeling that grand romance is just the most important and most powerful thing in the world. It feels so specific to being a young woman of that age. And while this book isn't really, it's not a YA, and I wouldn't call it a coming of age, this story through any other protagonist's eyes just wouldn't exist. I have also found since preparing for this video that this is one of those books that you appreciate more and more the more research you do. Like that I read interviews with the author, and read about the Patty Hearst story that it's inspired by. And the more that I learned, the more I learned about Corsica's history and went into it, and the more appreciation I had for this story. And I think that partially that could be to do with the fact that the sort of minutiae of political sort of stuff and the discussions that they were having around that certainly would have gone over my head a little bit. And so I would have sort of lost out on some elements of the story, and so reading more into it afterwards is certainly aiding in my understanding and appreciation of the nuances of the situation. But I think that, yeah, reading about Darrow Farr's approach and what inspired her and why she chose a teenage girl as the protagonist and what have you, it's given me a newfound appreciation for this book, which, to be honest, when I first finished it, I thought, hey, that was interesting. And I was like intrigued while I was reading it, but I don't feel like I connected to it too much. But in the weeks since finishing it, I have had a lot to think about, and I feel like it would make a really great book club book. Like, I feel like you could have some fantastic discussions about this book. So if you run a book club and you're looking for a book. I then read Self-Portrait with Boy, which is the debut novel by Rachel Lyon, who is the author of Fruit of the Dead. I hadn't seen anything about Self-Portrait with Boy until a colleague of mine read it and recommended it. It is about a visual artist who starts taking daily self-portraits, and one day, it's like 100 and something portrait, she accidentally captures her masterpiece. It is gonna be her career-making photograph, right? It's this ethereal sort of capturing movement of herself, and then in the background is the window to her apartment, and there's this boy in motion falling from the roof of the apartment block. And so this incredible photo that she's taken is a photo of this boy, her neighbor's son's last living moment. It unfolds from there, where she's like, okay, so I know that this photo could absolutely make my career. Like, I am a struggling artist and I've been trying to find my master work, you know, my one sort of piece that will break me out into the industry, and this is it. However, it is of my neighbor's son falling to his death. So really exhibit that, can I? And so while she's like reckoning with this, like, oh, what do I do? She finds herself becoming like involved in this like really intense friendship with the neighbor, the mother of this boy, who she only really knew as a neighbor, and now she becomes like really intensely friends with her. She also starts to believe that she is being haunted by the boy. Also, like, this apartment block that they live in, it's sort of like this collective of artists, and they're sort of being pushed out by the owner of the building, and they're all kind of like fighting for their rights to live there. And so there's this sort of chaos happening there, and of course, because they're all artists, they're all very eccentric, and so there's these intense personalities surrounding her. It becomes very intense and very sort of almost anxiety inducing. I absolutely loved it, and I loved like waiting to find out what she was gonna do, as this thing that was just looming over her was haunting her, and she like had to make a decision but just couldn't. And it was just like, oh my god, like, is she gonna do the fuck thing? Is she gonna do the good thing? It was a really, really enjoyable read. If you're looking for something a little bit more dark, or maybe something verging on a sort of mystery crime, it's like a literary fiction that's just kind of dipping one little toe into the world of crime. It brings that sort of that intensity from a crime genre novel into it, just by sort of getting a little pinch. It has technically been optioned. It's going to get turned into a film, allegedly, starring Thomasin McKenzie and Zoe Kravitz. However, it's one of those ones where it's like, is it actually going to end up happening? Stay tuned. Would be cool if it was. It looks like they're really leaning into a bit more of a psychological horror element with the movie. It's not a direct adaptation. There are some creative liberties happening. It seems like they're going to change it a bit tonally, and I'm excited. So I hope it does happen. Speaking of psychological fuckery, I then read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This was published in 1892. Yep, it's a short story. It's less than 100 pages. And I picked it up because I read Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is about this rumored society in deep in the sort of rainforest of only women, and this group of male explorers are like, we're going to go find them and we're going to find out if this community really exists, because how the hell are they having kids if there's no blokes there? And so this group of explorers go and they find the women, they find her land, and then they kind of get taken in and spend some time amongst her land. And I really loved the story, not only for its like commentary on patriarchy and, you know, the fact that it's this hectic feminist text from like over 100 years ago, but it also has so much humor. Like, it's so satirical and so funny. And I loved Charlotte Perkins Gilman for that. And so very curious about the rest of her work. So I picked up The Yellow Wallpaper because I feel like that is her most famous or most sort of celebrated, talked about work. So The Yellow Wallpaper, which is categorized as a gothic horror, basically follows this woman who is essentially trapped in a room by her husband because she's suffering from a sort of hysteria, right? And he's like, it will do you good to just stay in this room. Don't do anything at all. Just be in this room because you're not doing too good. You're a bit nervous in the mind. And it becomes very clear that she is suffering from postnatal depression, and being confined to this room with literally nothing to do but study the yellow wallpaper, she descends into madness. And it's, you know, a commentary on patriarchy again, on specifically sort of how women's mental health issues were horrifically dealt with back then. And it was written off the back of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's own experience with postpartum depression, where she was actually instructed by her doctor at the time to rest, right, and do nothing and stew in your depression, which was, believed to be the accurate treatment for it. And she realized, she was like, this is not working and I need to go against doctor's orders and get up and write. And so she did. And so this story is almost like, is allegedly a response to her doctor and her own experience of postnatal depression. So it's a very important story. And, you know, some people argue that it actually changed the methods with which, or, you know, influenced a change in the way that women's mental disorders were treated. Who knows? Having now read two of her fiction works and read a lot about her as a person, I am becoming like a little bit obsessed with Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So you can expect me to talk about her for the foreseeable future. The next book that I read was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Yeah, I know. Who am I and where are you? Don't worry, this is still a literary fiction page. I am not a convert. Let me just say that. But I just get FOMO sometimes, you know? Oh, my rings are on the wrong finger. That's not the finger I wear those on. Anyways, I get FOMO sometimes. Obviously, I don't exist in the fantasy pocket of Book Talk or BookTube or what have you, but from time to time, somebody will pop up talking about ACOTAR or Throne of Glass or what have you, and I do get a little bit of FOMO because I've always found that fantasy readers, they have this passion. They have this passion and this devotion and this love for the characters that I don't experience with literary fiction. And maybe that comes with reading series, because then you get to spend so much time in one world with these characters. So I suppose it would make sense that you would form a really intense sort of connection to them, right? So maybe that's sort of where it comes from. But then I'm like, okay, so I wish I could read series. Like, why are there no literary fiction series? I say, having read the first in a series, I'll talk about that soon. But yeah, I don't know. So I just from time to time, I'm like, let me check in and see if maybe I could get into a fantasy novel. And the last one I did was Fourth Wing, and it was fine, but I didn't care to pick up the next one. You know what I mean? But I figured I'm going on holiday. I want to just mind off holiday read. I know that I struggle with smut. It just makes me a little bit oh. I'd heard that Throne of Glass was less smutty, so I decided to do that. And you know what? I enjoyed my time with it. I gobbled it up. You know, it was a very easy read. I feel like those books seem to be written in a way that feels to like Taylor Jenkins Reid would be my comparison, just in terms of like very readable, right? However, I don't care. I don't care about the stories. To me, like, the tournament was sort of just like this inconsequential, very predictable, just kind of backdrop for this love triangle, right? And we were really there for the love triangle. But even the love triangle felt a bit juvenile to me. I obviously had my love interest that I was rooting for, who I can only imagine is the favorite love interest. Like, I've picked the correct one, I'm sure. But I was just like, you know what? Even though I like that guy and I hope that she chooses that guy, I also could not care less. I do think that, like, it wasn't the fantasy element that didn't work for me. And I'm open to reading more fantasy. I mean, I just bought Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. So we'll be reading more fantasy. It was just like the overall. My next read was a stunning debut that was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in, I think, like 2020. It was Real Life by Brandon Taylor. And oh boy, this was a gorgeous novel. It follows a young gay black man doing his PhD in America's South. And a lot of the experiential elements of this story do come from Brandon Taylor's own experiences, especially sort of his experiences with abuse, as well as, you know, being a gay black man in America's South. And so the intricacy, I suppose, with which these elements were woven into the story, which only spans a weekend, it all felt very poignant, felt very real. It was very sort of minute and nuanced and realistic, and really was like a gut punch. So in this story, we follow Wallace as he navigates a lot of kind of complicated shit going on in his life at this time, including a very complex grief for his estranged father who has just passed, a unhealthy relationship, some childhood trauma, and some deep insecurities about his place not only within his friendship group but also within his PhD program. But while Wallace is dealing with a lot of shit, he also like isn't the perfect protagonist. Like, he himself is, throughout the course of this weekend, committing transgressions against his friends that you as the reader, like, you want to sympathize with him, but you have to work really hard at times, right? Because why the fuck did you do that, Wallace? It's this very sort of complicated push and pull as a reader that you're like, how am I supposed to feel about you right now, Wallace, when you've gone and done that? This story honestly wasn't at all what I was expecting. I think it was a little bit more, the writing was a bit more highbrow than I was sort of ready for, especially like there's these really long passages just detailing Wallace doing his science experiments, like doing the science stuff, and that very much went over my head. I don't know if they were supposed to be metaphorical or if it was just like maybe Brandon, who is a scientist himself, is kind of indulging and writing about what he knows. I don't really know. It felt like thematically and emotionally, it very much reminded me of If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, for the intense, tumultuous relationship dynamic, and then Open Water for the way that it deals with race. It very much reminded me of those two books. But again, like, the story itself was very much unlike a story I've read before, and I felt obviously could not relate to a lot of the book. It very much was just like learning and taking away. But his feelings of insecurity within his friendship group, I very much resonated with. And so that was sort of a very sort of almost like quite intimate sticking point and through line and connection that I was able to sort of get into the story and sort of get into Wallace's shoes. And very beautifully written, and completely see why it was shortlisted for the prize. I'm actually curious what won that year? Like, what beat it out? Okay, it was Shuggie Bain. So I get it. Yeah. All right. That makes sense. I understand. Fair enough. But yeah, hey, tough competition because real life was really freaking good. It has been, or, it was optioned by Kid Cudi's production company, which who knew he had one of those? And allegedly Brandon Taylor finished writing the screenplay at the end of 2021, but we have not heard anything since. So now, speaking of literary series, I then read the first of a 7-part series on the calculation of volume by a Danish writer called, I think, Solve Balle. Now, this was self-published by Solve Balle in 2020. She was a published author for ages, and then she sort of went off the grid, and then she started her own publishing company, and self-published this work with, the whole series planned out, ready to go. And then in 2024, I believe it was translated. The first 2 were translated by Barbara J. Haviland, and then that English translation was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize this year, 2025. To me, this very much felt like cozy fiction. As sci-fi as the plot is, it follows a protagonist who finds herself waking up on the exact same day over and over again, like a Groundhog Day type repeating situation. There isn't any sort of sense of adventure or excitement or mystique. Whether or not it is a more or less realistic depiction of what a real person would do if they found themselves in this situation, I don't know. If you've read it, what do you think? Do you think that you would behave more like the protagonist in this book if you realized you were waking up on the same day every single day repeating itself? Or would you maybe fuck around a little more, or try a little harder to figure out how to stop it, or, do anything else? I feel like I would do more. I feel like I would act differently, but how should I know? At this point, I can't say whether or not I would recommend the book. I think I'm gonna read part 2, and if the story goes on in an interesting way in part 2, then yes, I'll recommend this. But if part 2 is sort of much the same or less exciting, or I feel like the protagonist is being annoying, then I don't think I can recommend it. At this point, I don't think I can see why it was shortlisted for the prize. I don't really get it. I don't know. The protagonist just frustrated me. Do something, gah. And the last book that I finished on my way home was Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, who is a writer and violinist. Fun fact, fully plays in orchestras, great violinist. Basically, this is a deeply unsettling satirical horror about the booming wellness industry and Western beauty standards. Now, curiously, it is only available as an ebook in Australia, but hopefully she has a second book called Immaculate Conception, which I believe is out in the world, but in Australia it's coming out in September. So hopefully if that does well, then Natural Beauty will get a physical release in Australia. But yeah, luckily you can read it on the e-reader. It's actually free on Kobo Plus. That's why I read it. And holy shit, it was so good. So the story follows an unnamed young Asian woman who was this incredible pianist, was going so far, that had the whole world ahead of her, career as a renowned pianist, and then something happens that causes her to stop playing, and she becomes very strapped for cash. She's in this really difficult situation. She's working as a dishwasher at a restaurant, and here is where she is essentially poached by this renowned beauty company and hired there. And the pay is fantastic, and there are all these perks, and you get to you're required to use the products and their services, and she's suddenly like, she's glowing, and it's just like the best thing that's ever happened for a while. And then there's darker stuff going on, of course. I absolutely freaking loved this book, right? It's what I imagine, similar to what The Substance is. I haven't watched that. I very much hesitate to watch it because of the body horror. However, this book had a lot of body horror as well. It was extremely yucky and disturbing and unsettling. Also just like psychologically disturbing, you know, the way that the women were so like deftly manipulated into wanting to do literally anything to be beautiful. You know, it's such a sharp commentary on the current state of the beauty industry and the procedures that are now sort of like not only like rising in popularity, but also becoming a lot more accessible. Oh my gosh, I have so many good things to say about this book. I think it was my favorite read of the trip. I'm pretty sure it was, yeah. I think I can confidently say Natural Beauty by Ling Huang was number one book that I read while I was traveling. So 100% get that in your mitts. If you're in Australia, it's going to be an ebook situation, I believe. Unless I'm mistaken. I don't know. I did Googles. I couldn't find it, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, finally, guys, I'm just going to touch on the last book that I did start while I was traveling. I have not finished it. I'm only like 20% through. And it's taken me so long to read this. And I swear it has nothing to do with the book. It's literally just because I'm like jet lagged or exhausted or something. And so every time I sit down to read, I literally fall asleep within like 2 pages. So it's taken me a really long time to get through this. And I'm not liking that because I feel like I'm not getting a good experience with it, right? If I'm only reading like 2 pages at a time, like I'm never getting fully absorbed by the story. So I might just put it down for a while and like even take a break from reading. I'm literally moving house at the moment, right? So I think what I might do is just take a break. No, blasphemy. I don't know what to do. Anyways, it is a book that was recommended to me actually by a follower by the name of Olivia Colman. Shout out Olivia Colman. I think about your scene in Heartstopper all the time. It's Butter Honey Pig Bread. Hello. Now, yes, as you can see, this follower told me to read it because it's food writing, and y'all know that I love food writing. And honestly, I don't think I've ever taken a recommendation from a follower and it not been fabulous. Like, I feel like the way you guys understand my taste, it's so self-indulgent for me to say this. Like, please tell me what to read because you know me so well. But I just will say, like, you guys make fantastic recommendations. Sometimes I'm like, do you want to take my job? Like, you're good at this. So far, I'm absolutely loving this. I just like, my experience with it is I'm struggling, right? Because I can't stay awake. But it's basically it's a story about 3 women, one mother and her twin daughters, essentially. And we sort of follow their generational history, I guess. And Francesca Ekwuyasi is Nigerian Canadian. And so it's set in Nigeria, and there is this element of folklore, which I have read before in Ekwuyasi's Fresh Water, which is Obanje, I think it's pronounced. This idea of Obanje, which is basically this sort of old kind where they basically believe this dark spirit essentially like possesses children with the intention of causing the mother trauma. And it very much is associated with like mothers who experience stillbirths or whose children die quite young, sort of thing. That's where this kind of Obanje belief exists, right? And so in this story, the mother of the twins was believed to be by her parents, and herself believes to be an Obanje, because her mother experienced like a number of miscarriages and stillbirths and stuff. It's just fucking awful. Like, you can understand where this sort of folkloric belief comes from, right? And it's sort of about how that dark history and then the traumas that the twins, or at least one of the twins, experienced in her childhood are all sort of feeding together. And that's as much as I sort of understand of it so far. The twins moved away and have come back. And so now it's sort of like, okay, they're reunited and now they're going to deal with their family history, I think is sort of the crux of it. But so far, the food, yeah, there's like real focus on food, and like full sort of, here's how you make this thing. It's awesome. I'm loving it. I just really need to be able to lock in a lot more. So yeah, I'm thinking I might put it down and maybe either try to read something else for a while or just like allow myself to not read for a bit while I'm doing other hectic life stuff and feeling exhausted and just kind of needing to sleep. But those are my recommendations. How funny that every single book that I read while I was away is essentially a recommendation. That's a lie. Not every single book, but a lot of them. I really liked them. If you've read any of them, let's chat about them right now in the comments. I have so many questions about so many of these books, like so many things that I want to discuss. I feel like so many of them would make great book club books. So I'm just thinking about that. But anyway, let's chat. I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. I love you so much.